grew up in a place called Cumberland, a small town tucked deep in Harlan County, Kentucky. If you've never been there, the easiest way to describe it is that everything feels older than it should. Not historic, just worn, like the land itself is tired. Coal used to be everything there. By the time I was a kid in the early 2000s, most of the mines were already shut down, but the town still revolved around them like a ghost limb. Men woke up early for jobs that barely existed anymore. Churches stayed full. People minded their business because that's what you did if you wanted a quiet life. There were things we didn't talk about, not because we were told not to, but because no one ever asked. The road I'm talking about is State Route 2005, though nobody called it that. We just called it the Old Cut-Through. It winds up into the hills toward Pine Mountain, narrow and unlit, with no houses past a certain point. Just trees, abandoned tipples, and the remains of old mining access roads that the state never bothered to reclaim. When I was growing up, everyone knew not to drive that way at night. No ghost stories, no warnings, just a quiet understanding. My dad was the kind of man who didn't believe in nonsense. He worked maintenance at the courthouse in Harlan and fixed cars on the side. If something broke, you fixed it. If someone complained too much, you ignored them. So when I was 16 and asked him why nobody used the cut-through after dark, he didn't hesitate. Too many accidents, he said. That was it. I believed him for years. The first time I went up there at night was the summer after I graduated high school. A buddy of mine, Evan McCready, had just gotten his first truck, a rusted-out Ford Ranger that barely passed inspection. We were bored, restless, and convinced that nothing bad ever really happened anymore. It was Evan's idea. "Let's take the cut-through," he said, grinning like he was daring the road itself to object. We hit the turn just after midnight. The temperature dropped almost immediately, the way it does in the mountains when the trees close in. Evan turned the radio down without saying anything. Gravel popped under the tires. Our headlights carved narrow tunnels through the brush. About 10 minutes in, we passed the first thing that made my stomach tighten. A white wooden cross, nailed together unevenly, standing just off the road. Then another, then another. They weren't memorials for car wrecks. No names, no flowers, just blank, weathered crosses, half swallowed by weeds. Evan laughed it off. "Guess folks are religious up here." But he didn't speed up. We reached a stretch where the trees thinned out, revealing an old mining clearing. That's when we saw the lights. They weren't headlights. Too low, too spread out. They formed a rough line across the dirt access road leading off the main path. Lanterns, maybe, or flashlights on the ground. Evan slowed to a stop. Someone stepped into the beam of our headlights. It was a man, older, maybe late 50s, with a beard gone fully gray. He raised one hand, palm out, not aggressive, just final. "Road's closed," he said. Evan leaned out the window. "Since when?" The man didn't answer. Another person emerged from the trees behind him. Then another. All men, all older, all dressed like they'd come straight from work. Boots, denim, flannel. No phones, no reflective vests. No county markings. Turn around, the first man said. You don't want to be here. I remember the way he said want, like it wasn't advice. Evan reversed without arguing. We didn't talk the whole way back. The next morning, I asked my dad about it. I described the lights, the men, the crosses. He went quiet in a way I'd never seen before. Then he said, "You shouldn't have gone up there." That was it. I left Kentucky 2 years later for work in Lexington, then eventually Ohio. I didn't think about Harlan County much. Life got busy, normal, until my dad had a stroke. I moved back to Cumberland to help my mom, and suddenly I was surrounded by old places again. Old people, old silences. Dad never fully recovered his speech, but his mind stayed sharp. One night, while I was helping him sort through boxes in the garage, I found something strange. A clipboard, buried beneath rags and tools. Inside were typed lists, dated from the late 1980s through the early 2000s. Names, ages. Some had check marks, some didn't. At the top of one page was a heading, Pine Mountain Access after sundown. My hands started shaking. That night, I asked him directly, "What happened on the cut-through?" Dad stared at the TV for a long time before answering. "You remember the mines shutting down," he said slowly. "You remember folks losing everything." I nodded. "There were men passing through back then," he continued. "Drifters, addicts, people running from things. They'd find the old roads, the camps, the empty houses." My throat went dry. "Sheriff's office couldn't keep up," Dad said. "County didn't have the money. State didn't care." "So what did people do?" I asked. Dad finally looked at me. They handled it. The truth came out in pieces after that. Not all from him. Some from neighbors after too much bourbon. Some from old court clerks who trusted me because I was his kid. The men on the road weren't vigilantes in the way people imagine. They were volunteers, retired miners, former deputies, church deacons, men who believed genuinely that they were protecting their town when no one else would. Anyone found past a certain point after dark was stopped. Warned once. The second time, they were taken up into the hills. There were no shallow graves, no mass killings, nothing dramatic. Just people who were never seen again, officially marked as having moved on or overdosed somewhere else. The crosses weren't memorials. They were tallies. I confronted my dad one last time before he passed. "You were part of it," I said. He didn't deny it. "We didn't hurt anyone who didn't mean harm," he said. I thought about Evan, about the fear in that old man's voice. "Who decides that?" I asked. Dad closed his eyes. "The road is still there, still quiet, still avoided. The crosses are mostly gone now, rotted away or pulled up. The men are dead or too old to stand in the woods at night. But sometimes, when I drive through Harlan County after sunset, I swear I see lights flicker up on Pine Mountain, not moving, just waiting." My family owns a cabin near Lake Jocassee up in the northwestern corner of South Carolina. right where the foothills start turning into mountains. It's not the kind of place you stumble across by accident. You have to want to be there. The road that leads to it isn't even paved the whole way. After you pass the last ranger station, it turns to gravel, then dirt, then something closer to habit than a road. No cell service, no neighbors, just trees, water, and silence that feels deliberate. The cabin was built in the late 1970s by my grandfather, Earl Whitman, back when the lake was still relatively new and nobody had figured out how valuable that land would become. It was meant to be a retreat, somewhere to fish, drink, and forget about the rest of the world for a few days at a time. Growing up, it was the center of every summer. Birthdays, holidays, family reunions. Every good memory I have before the age of 12 has that cabin somewhere in the background. There was only one rule. No one ever stayed there alone. No reason was ever given. It wasn't framed as a safety thing. It was just stated, calmly and firmly, like gravity or weather. When my cousins and I asked why, the adults would exchange looks and say things like, "That's just how it is," or "You don't want to be out there by yourself." We eventually stopped asking. My Uncle Thomas was the one who broke that rule. Uncle Tom wasn't a reckless person. He was quiet, meticulous, the kind of man who labeled his tools and folded his shirts the same way every time. He worked as a civil engineer in Greenville, had no kids, no drama, no bad habits. After my grandfather died, Tom became the unofficial caretaker of the cabin. He handled repairs, paid the property taxes, made sure the place didn't fall apart. So when he told everyone he was going up alone one weekend in October to fix the dock, nobody argued, not even my dad. That should have been the first sign something was wrong. Tom left on a Friday morning. By Sunday night, nobody had heard from him. By Monday, my aunt was calling the sheriff. They found his truck parked where it always was, just off the clearing. The cabin door was unlocked. His bag was inside. His phone was on the kitchen table, completely dead. Uncle Tom was found Tuesday afternoon, about a quarter-mile down by the water. He hadn't drowned. He hadn't fallen. According to the report, he died of exposure, which didn't make sense. October nights were cold, sure, but not deadly. And Tom had grown up there. He knew the terrain. He knew the weather. What really didn't make sense was where they found him. He was sitting upright against a tree, legs straight out, hands resting on his thighs, like he'd simply stopped. The official explanation was that he'd gotten disoriented after dark, panicked, and succumbed to the cold. That explanation stuck, mostly because nobody pushed back. The cabin was locked up after the funeral. Winter came. Life moved on. Except for my grandmother. She stopped speaking after Tom died. Not metaphorically. She still answered questions, still ate, still functioned, but she never initiated conversation again. And she never, ever mentioned the cabin. When she passed 2 years later, the property was left to my dad and his siblings. That's when the arguments started. sell it, keep it, turn it into a rental. In the end, my dad decided we'd go up one last time as a family, sort through my grandfather's things, see if the place still felt like home. We went in July, peak summer, full daylight. Still, something felt wrong the moment we arrived. The woods were too quiet. No insects, no birds, no distant boat motors from the lake. Just wind through the trees and the soft slap of water against the shore. Inside the cabin, nothing had changed. Same furniture, same photos. Same faint smell of old wood and lake water. I was helping my dad clean out the back bedroom when I found a notebook under the bed. It wasn't old. The cover was clean. The pages inside were filled with my uncle's handwriting. Dates, times, observations. At first, it read like a maintenance log. Dock boards loose. Generator running rough. Strange sounds near water after midnight. That last one appeared more than once. The further I read, the worse it got. Tom had been hearing movement outside at night, footsteps that stopped when he turned on lights, the sound of something dragging along the shoreline. He wrote about waking up to the feeling that someone was standing just outside the cabin, close enough to cast a shadow against the curtains. Always in silence. No voices, no animals, just presence. The final entry was dated the night he died. It doesn't come when more than one of us is here. I think that's why Dad made the rule. My stomach dropped. I took the notebook to my dad. He didn't look surprised. He sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed his face like he'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "When I was a kid," he said, "your grandpa brought us out here with his brother." My dad had never mentioned having an uncle. "They went fishing after dark," he continued. "Only one of them came back." According to my dad, the story was always framed as an accident, a fall, a drowning, something unfortunate but natural. But afterward, my grandfather noticed something. Whatever it was, it stayed near the cabin. It didn't approach when groups were present. It didn't make noise when lights were on. It never crossed open ground during the day. But when someone was alone, it came closer. Close enough to be felt. Close enough to be followed. My grandfather figured out the rule by accident. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he stepped outside alone. Something moved at the edge of the trees. Something large enough to block out the stars. He ran back inside and never spent another night there by himself. "That's why we always came together," my dad said. "Why no one stayed behind, why no one questioned it." Uncle Tom didn't know the whole story. He just thought it was superstition. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside the cabin. Slow, careful, unhurried. I lay there, heart pounding, listening as they circled the building. They stopped outside my window. I didn't look. I don't know how long it stood there. Eventually, the steps moved away, back toward the lake. The next morning, my dad announced we were leaving early. No arguments, no packing delays. We locked the cabin and never went back. A few months later, The land was sold to the state and folded into the park system. They tore the cabin down. But sometimes, when I look up Lake Jocassee on satellite maps, I notice something strange. A narrow clearing near the old shoreline. Too straight to be natural. Like a path that gets used just enough not to disappear. I grew up in Red Bluff, California, a small town off Interstate 5 where the Sacramento River bends and the heat never really lets go. If you've driven through, you probably remember the gas stations, the fast food signs, and not much else. Most people don't stop unless they have to. The people who live there do. Red Bluff is the kind of town where everyone knows who you are, who your parents are, and roughly what kind of trouble you might get into before you even do it. It's quiet, predictable, and built on routine. Friday night football, church on Sunday, wildfire season every summer, and at the center of all that was Fire Chief Alan Mercer. If you asked anyone in town who the most respected man was, his name came up immediately. He'd been chief for over 20 years, ran drills at the high school, organized fundraisers, showed up first at every brush fire, and stayed last. He was the kind of authority figure parents wanted their kids around, which is why what happened took so long to come out. My first real memory of Chief Mercer was from when I was about 8. A grass fire had jumped a fence near our neighborhood, and half the town turned out to watch the engines work. I remember standing behind the yellow tape, watching him move calmly through the smoke like it didn't bother him at all. He crouched down to my level afterward and handed me a plastic fire helmet. "Thinking about joining up someday?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled. "We need good kids." I kept that helmet for years. As I got older, he became more present in my life. Not in a creepy way, not obviously. He coached the volunteer cadet program. He gave rides home after late practices. He was always around, always helping, always watching. If a kid was struggling, Mercer noticed. If a kid needed structure, Mercer provided it. That was his reputation. So when the first fire happened, no one questioned the timing. It was an abandoned shed on the east side of town, burned down one night in late August. No injuries, no spread. Chalked up to heat and negligence. The second fire was a few weeks later. A brush fire near the riverbank. Again, nothing major. Mercer's crew handled it quickly. By the third fire, people were joking about Red Bluff being cursed. I was 17 then, working part-time at a grocery store and thinking mostly about getting out of town. But even I noticed the pattern. Every fire happened late. Every fire happened somewhere isolated. Every fire was discovered just early enough to be dramatic, but never disastrous. And Mercer was always there first. Then a kid named Logan Pierce disappeared. Logan was 16, quiet, a little strange, but harmless. He was part of the cadet program, just like me. He showed up to drills, followed rules, kept his head down. The official story was that he ran away. His parents didn't believe it. Neither did I. Logan loved the firehouse. He loved the routine, the praise, the feeling of being useful. He talked about becoming a firefighter, like it was already decided. The last person to see him was Chief Mercer. According to Mercer, Logan had stayed late one evening to help clean equipment. Mercer said he'd sent him home around 10. No one questioned it. Why would they? The searches came up empty. A few half-hearted rumors circulated, then faded. People don't like unresolved things in small towns. They make everyone uncomfortable. Life moved on. The fires didn't stop. That fall, I noticed something strange during a training session. Mercer was demonstrating controlled burn procedures, explaining how to read a fire. "Fire's honest," he said. "It tells you what it wants if you know how to listen." He looked directly at me when he said it. I remember feeling unsettled, though I couldn't explain why. A week later, I stayed late after a drill to help inventory gear. I was alone in the equipment room when I heard voices coming from Mercer's office. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The walls were thin. Mercer was talking softly. At first, I thought he was on the phone. Then I realized he was the only one speaking. "You did good," he said. A pause. "I know it's hard." Another pause. "But you can't hesitate. That's how people get hurt." I stood frozen, listening. "There's a place for you here," Mercer continued. "You just have to earn it." When the door opened, I ducked behind a rack of jackets. Mercer stepped out alone. The next fire happened 2 nights later. This one was bigger. A vacant house on Walnut Street went up fast. Flames through the roof by the time the first engine arrived. Mercer was already on scene when dispatch called it in. That night, something snapped in me. I started paying attention. I noticed how Mercer always seemed to know where the fires would be worst, how he positioned crews with uncanny precision, how he lingered afterward, staring into the remains like he was reading something no one else could see. I started asking quiet questions. An older volunteer finally pulled me aside and told me to let it go. "Don't ruin a good thing," he said. "Mercer's kept this town safe for decades." That was the phrase everyone used. Kept us safe. The truth came to me by accident. I was helping clean out old records at the firehouse when I found a box labeled Cadet Program 1998 to 2005. Inside were attendance sheets, evaluations, handwritten notes. Patterns jumped out immediately. Certain names appeared repeatedly in Mercer's handwriting. Phrases like "shows promise," "needs guidance," "responds well to pressure." And then there were names that stopped appearing altogether. Kids who'd moved away, kids who'd dropped out, kids who'd gone bad, kids like Logan. At the bottom of the box was a thinner folder. Inside were incident reports that never made it to the county. Small fires, near misses, training exercises that weren't officially logged. The locations matched places where kids had been alone. I finally understood. Mercer wasn't just responding to fires. He was creating them. Not recklessly, carefully, methodically. He used them to test people, to see who showed up, who panicked, who followed orders, who listened to him without question. And if someone failed, they didn't get another chance. I don't know exactly what happened to Logan. I don't know if Mercer pushed him too far, or scared him into running, or something worse. What I do know is that Logan's name appeared one last time in Mercer's notes. Wouldn't listen, too afraid. I took the folder to my dad. He worked for the city. He didn't even finish reading before closing it. "You need to forget this," he said. "People could get hurt," I argued. He looked at me like I was a child again. "They already have," he said, "and fewer people will if you keep your mouth shut." Chief Mercer retired 6 months later. Big ceremony, plaque, speeches. No more fires after that. None. I left Red Bluff shortly after and never went back. A few years ago, I looked him up. He died in a house fire. Electrical, they said. No one mentioned the irony. Sometimes I wonder how many people he really saved, and how many he decided weren't worth it. Because in Red Bluff, we trusted him, and that made all the difference. I used to think that if something went wrong in the wilderness, help would come. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. A ranger, a helicopter, someone. That belief almost killed me. This happened in Anza Borrego Desert State Park in Southern California, a place that looks empty until you realize it's very good at hiding things. The desert doesn't announce danger. It just waits. I was 23, working a seasonal job in San Diego, and feeling invincible in the way only people in their early 20s can. My friend Caleb and I planned a 3-day hiking loop through one of the less traveled sections of the park. Nothing extreme, just far enough from the main trails to feel like we'd earned the experience. We registered at the ranger station, left our route plan, did everything right. At least we thought we did. The first day went perfectly. Clear skies, mild temperatures, the kind of desert beauty that makes you forget how hostile the environment actually is. We made camp in a shallow wash, surrounded by rock formations that blocked most of the wind. That night, we heard something moving outside the perimeter of our headlamps. Not animals, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be coyotes, too controlled to be deer. Caleb whispered, "You hear that?" I did, but by the time we clicked on our lights, the sound stopped. We chalked it up to nerves and went back to sleep. The second day is when things started going wrong. Around noon, we realized we were off trail. Not dramatically, just enough that landmarks weren't lining up the way they should have. Caleb insisted we drifted too far west. I thought we'd gone south. The GPS on his phone refused to load. No signal, no map tiles. By mid-afternoon, the heat was getting worse, and we made the call to stop pushing forward and backtrack to the wash from the night before. That's when we found the first marker. A small pile of stones stacked neatly beside a dried-out crevice. And first, I felt relief. Someone else had been here. That meant people came through this area. Then, we saw another, and another. each one spaced just far enough apart to be reassuring. We followed them. They led us deeper into the Badlands. By the time the sun started dropping, we realized the markers weren't leading anywhere. They formed a loose circle, always pulling us forward, never back. Caleb was the first to say it out loud. "These aren't trail markers." He was right. They were too consistent, too deliberate. We camped where we were, uneasy and low on water. That night, the footsteps came back. Closer this time. I remember lying in my tent, listening to someone, something, walk slow laps around our camp. No flashlight, no talking, just boots on sand and stone. At one point, a shadow passed between me and the moonlight. Caleb unzipped his tent, just enough to whisper, "Don't move." We stayed frozen until dawn. In the morning, our water was gone. Both bottles, completely empty. No punctures, no leaks, just empty. Panic does strange things to your sense of time. Everything sped up and slowed down at once. We argued about what to do, voices sharp, words overlapping. That's when we heard the engine, a vehicle, somewhere beyond the rocks. We scrambled toward the sound, yelling until our throats burned. We crested a ridge and saw a white pickup truck parked in a narrow canyon below us. Two men stood beside it. They looked normal, middle-aged, sun-hardened, dressed like hikers or maybe off-roaders. Relief hit me so hard, my legs went weak. One of them raised a hand, palm out, the same way you'd signal someone to stop. Then he pointed, not toward his truck, away from it, toward a narrow gap between the rocks. Caleb hesitated. "Why won't they help us?" I started down the slope anyway. That's when the man shook his head, slowly, deliberately, and mouthed something I couldn't hear. "Go." The engine started. The truck reversed out of sight. We were alone again. By midday, Caleb collapsed. Heat exhaustion, dehydration. He was conscious, but barely. I dragged him into what little shade I could find and rationed the last sips from my emergency bladder. That's when the radio crackled. A voice came through my handheld, distorted but clear enough to understand. "Do not continue moving." I nearly cried. "We need help," I said. "My friend is hurt." There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Help is not coming." I thought I'd misheard. "What?" I said. "You are outside the response area," the voice continued. "Remain where you are." "Who is this?" I asked. Another pause. Then, "You were warned at the markers." The radio went dead. Caleb didn't make it through the night. He slipped in and out of consciousness, mumbling things that didn't make sense. At some point, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "They're waiting." I didn't sleep. At dawn, I heard movement again. Multiple sets of footsteps this time. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, empty and exhausted, waiting for whatever came next. Instead, a helicopter appeared on the horizon. Real, loud, undeniable. It landed less than a mile away. The rescue team found me sitting beside Caleb's body. They asked what happened. I told them everything. The markers, the men, the radio. The lead rescuer listened carefully. Then, shook his head. "There are no access roads where you described," he said, "and no one transmitted on that frequency." At the ranger station later, a woman pulled me aside. Quiet, serious. She asked me to point out where we'd gone off trail. When I did, her expression changed. "That area isn't monitored," she said. "Hasn't been for years." "Why?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because people who go too far in don't always want to be found. I still hike, but I stay on the trail now. And when I see stone markers where they shouldn't be, I turn around. Because now I know the truth. Sometimes, survival isn't about being rescued. It's about leaving before you're chosen to stay." If you ever find yourself driving through Ashton, Idaho, you'll probably miss it if you blink. One main road, a handful of diners, grain silos, and endless farmland stretching toward the Tetons. It looks like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. That's what I thought when my family moved there in 2004. My dad took a job at the potato processing plant just outside town. The pay was decent, the cost of living was low, and everyone we met seemed almost aggressively friendly. People waved, strangers introduced themselves, neighbors brought food by unannounced. There was only one thing that stood out right away. Ashton didn't have a church, not one. No steeples, no Sunday bells, no small white chapel tucked behind a grove of trees. For a rural town in eastern Idaho, that was strange. Even stranger was how people reacted when my mom asked about it. They'd smile, then gently change the subject. "We do things a little differently here," they'd say. I was 14 at the time, old enough to notice patterns, young enough not to understand them. It didn't take long to realize that most of the town revolved around a place called the Hall. The Hall sat just outside town limits, a long, low concrete building with no windows and a gravel parking lot big enough to hold half the town. Every Friday night, cars lined the road leading to it. Families arrived together, left together. No one ever seemed rushed. My parents were invited within the first month. "It's just a gathering," our neighbor Calvin Reed said. "Community stuff, food, music, keeps folks connected." My dad liked that idea. My mom was hesitant, but curiosity won out. The first time we went, nothing seemed off. There was food laid out on folding tables. People laughed. Kids ran around outside. Someone played guitar softly in the corner. No sermons, no prayers, no symbols I recognized. At one point, a man everyone called Mr. Hale stood up and spoke. He wasn't charismatic in the usual way. No booming voice, no dramatic gestures. He spoke calmly, like a teacher explaining something simple. "We believe in responsibility," he said, "in accountability, in making sure no one here falls through the cracks." People nodded. "We look after our own." That phrase stuck with me. Over time, the gatherings became routine. My parents made friends. I was encouraged, gently, persistently, to participate more. Help set up, stay wait, listen closely. What I didn't realize at first was how little time anyone in Ashton spent away from each other. People didn't lock their doors. Kids didn't have curfews. Teenagers didn't rebel. There was an unspoken understanding that the town itself was always watching. The first person to disappear was Emily Foster. She was 16, outspoken, and visibly unhappy in Ashton. She talked about leaving constantly. College, the city, anywhere else. One week he was there. The next, she wasn't. The explanation came quickly and without fuss. Family emergency, people said. She moved in with relatives. It's better for her. Her parents stayed in town. That should have bothered me more than it did. The second disappearance was harder to ignore. A man named Raymond Collins, mid-30s, quiet, lived alone on the edge of town. He'd missed a few gatherings, started declining invitations. Then one morning, his house was empty. Furniture, gone. Truck, missing. No for sale sign. No notice. Mr. Hale addressed it the following Friday. Ray chose a different path. He said calmly, "We wish him well." No one asked questions. I started to feel trapped in a way I couldn't articulate. Like Ashton wasn't just a place, it was a system. And once you were inside it, leaving required permission. That realization came too late. The night everything broke for me was during what they called a reflection. It was held once a year, attendance mandatory. No food, no music, just chairs arranged in a circle inside the hall. Mr. Hale spoke about honesty, about burdens, about how secrets corrode communities from the inside out. Then he asked people to stand. One by one, residents rose and confessed small things. Arguments, resentments, doubts. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, until a woman named Marjorie stood up shaking. She said she wanted to leave, just for a while. The room went quiet. Mr. Hale nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable," he said, "but leaving doesn't remove responsibility." Two men stepped forward, not aggressively, comfortingly. Marjorie was escorted out. She never came back. That night, I told my parents we needed to leave Ashton. My dad didn't answer. My mom cried. The next morning, our car wouldn't start. Neither would the truck. Calvin Reed stopped by that afternoon. "You're part of this place now," he said gently. "You don't want to make things difficult." I waited another week, then tried to run. I packed a backpack and left in the early morning, cutting through fields toward the highway. I almost made it. A van pulled alongside me less than a mile from town. Mr. Hale was inside. He didn't raise his voice. "You don't leave without balance," he said. "If you go, something must replace you." I don't remember getting back to Ashton. I remember waking up at home. My parents acted like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, a new family moved into town. They waved, smiled, settled in easily. That's when I understood. Ashton doesn't grow, it replaces. I left for good when I turned 18, accepted to a college far away. Mr. Hale shook my hand at the farewell gathering. "You've done your part," he said. I haven't been back since, but sometimes when I check satellite maps, out of curiosity, I notice something odd. Ashton hasn't expanded, hasn't shrunk. It's exactly the same size it was 20 years ago. And every Friday night, the parking lot at the hall is full. I grew up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a town most people only know because of a statue and a story they half remember. To us, it was just home. Steel gray skies, the Ohio River rolling past like it owned the place, and a constant feeling that everything important had already happened somewhere else. When something bad occurred in Point Pleasant, people blamed the river. Always the river. If a car went missing, it must have slid off the road. If a body turned up downstream, it must have fallen in drunk. If someone vanished entirely, well, the river doesn't give everything back. That explanation worked for a long time, until it didn't. The first death I remember clearly was Ethan Caldwell. He was a senior when I was a freshman. Quiet, well-liked, worked weekends at his dad's marina. Everyone said he knew the river better than anyone. They found his boat drifting near Kroger Island, engine still running. Ethan wasn't in it. The sheriff called it an accident before the search even finished. Strong current, they said. Cold water shock. Tragic, but common. Ethan's mom didn't argue publicly. Neither did his dad. They just stopped coming to town events and eventually moved away. That should have been the end of it. But over the next 6 years, 4 more people disappeared the same way. Always near the river, always at night, always someone who knew better. The pattern wasn't obvious unless you lived there long enough. I noticed because I worked summers at the marina after Ethan died. I started recognizing names, faces, the same hushed conversations repeating themselves. There's nothing anyone could have done. He shouldn't have been out there. You know how that water is. The strange part was how quickly the town moved on every time. No candlelight vigils, no fundraisers, no pressure on the sheriff's department. Just acceptance. The sheriff back then was Lloyd Hanratty, born and raised in Point Pleasant, elected unopposed for most of his career. People trusted him because he was familiar, because he went to the same churches, because he knew everyone's parents. When my friend Mara disappeared, that trust started to crack. Mara and I grew up together. She wasn't reckless. She didn't drink, didn't boat at night, didn't even like the river. She vanished walking home from her shift at a diner 2 blocks from Main Street. No water involved. At least, not at first. Her purse was found 3 days later, near the riverbank. The sheriff's office said it had probably been tossed there after she fell in somewhere upstream. That explanation made no sense. Everyone knew it, but no one said it out loud. I went to Hanratty myself, told him Mara wouldn't go near the river. He listened politely, nodded, and said, "Grief makes people see patterns that aren't there." That night, my dad told me to stop asking questions. "You don't want to stir things up," he said. That phrase came up a lot after that. Stir things up. The truth didn't come from the sheriff's office or the town council. It came from my grandfather, 3 months before he died. He'd been a volunteer firefighter in the 1970s, back when Point Pleasant was smaller and poorer and more desperate. He called me over one afternoon and asked if I still thought about Mara. When I said yes, he sighed. "You ever wonder why nobody fights the river stories?" he asked. I told him people were scared. "No," he said. "They're relieved." Then he told me about the meetings. They started after a flood in 1974, wiped out half the riverfront, and nearly bankrupted the town. Businesses closed. Families left. Crime crept in quietly. That's when a handful of men, law enforcement, business owners, city officials, started meeting privately. Not to plan crimes, to manage them. The idea was simple. If someone caused trouble, serious trouble, they deal with it quietly. No trials, no media, no outside attention. And the river was the perfect cover. Accidents happened there all the time. Nobody questioned it. My grandfather said he never participated, just knew it existed, knew when not to ask questions. I didn't believe him at first, until I started looking back. Ethan had reported stolen equipment at the marina. One of the other missing men had threatened to expose embezzlement at the plant. Another had been caught dealing drugs, but not to outsiders. Mara had overheard something at the diner, something she wasn't supposed to. That's why her purse was placed by the river, to close the circle. I confronted my dad again. This time, he didn't deny it. "You think we're monsters?" he asked. "This town survives because people make hard choices." "People died," I said. He looked tired. "So did the town," he said. "Once. We fixed it. I left Point Pleasant 6 months later. I live in Columbus now. Nobody here knows my name or my family history. The river here is just a river. But sometimes, when I go back to visit my parents, I walk along the Ohio River at night and watch the water move. It looks calm, innocent, like it always did. And I wonder how many towns like mine exist. Places where the worst things never make the news because everyone agrees not to look too closely. Places where the river gets blamed, and no one ever asks it if it's tired of carrying the guilt. I grew up in Braddock, Pennsylvania, just outside Pittsburgh. People like to call it a small town, but that's not quite right. It's urban in the way old steel towns are. Row houses packed tight, cracked sidewalks, corner bars older than the people drinking in them. Everyone lived on top of everyone else's business. And my family owned half the block. Not in a rich way, in a we've been here too long way. My grandfather bought up 3 adjoining buildings back in the 1960s when the mills were still running. A duplex, a storefront, and a narrow apartment building with 6 units stacked like shoeboxes. By the time I was born, the steel industry was gone, but we were still there, collecting rent, fixing leaks, and keeping the lights on. People knew our last name. They treated us carefully. At first, I thought that was respect. I learned later it was something else. The building I lived in was the duplex. My grandparents upstairs, my parents and me below. The storefront next door had been everything over the years. Barbershop, tax prep, thrift store. But by the time I was growing up, it was boarded up. The apartment building at the end of the block was where the trouble always was. Police calls, domestic disputes, ambulances at odd hours. My dad handled most of it. He fixed things personally, never raised rents, never evicted anyone unless he absolutely had to. He was known as a fair landlord. Too fair, some people said. There was one apartment no one ever talked about. Unit 3B. It sat on the 3rd floor, facing the alley. I don't remember ever seeing a tenant move in or out. The door stayed shut. The windows stayed covered. But the lights were always on, even during the day. When I was a kid, I asked my mom about it. She told me someone lived there who valued privacy. When I asked my dad, he told me not to worry about it. That answer scared me more. The first thing that made me suspicious happened when I was 12. A man named Victor Hale moved into the building. Mid-30s, quiet, paid cash, didn't complain. One night, I heard shouting from upstairs. Not Victor's apartment, 3B. I'd never heard noise from there before. The shouting stopped suddenly. The next morning, Victor was gone. No goodbye, no notice. His door was open, apartment empty. When the police showed up asking questions, my dad told them Victor had moved out weeks earlier. They didn't check. They trusted him. That wasn't the only time. Over the years, people came and went from that building, but certain ones disappeared without explanation. Usually after arguments, usually after police visits, and always, somehow, the paperwork made it look clean. I didn't connect the dots until I came back home at 28 after my mom died. My dad was older then, slower. The buildings were in worse shape. He asked for my help managing things. One night, while sorting old records in the storefront, I found a locked filing cabinet. Inside were folders that didn't match anything else. Incident reports, handwritten notes, old police case numbers, all involving tenants. All marked resolved. Some of the names I recognized. Victor Hale was one of them. My hands were shaking when I found the key taped under the drawer. Inside the smallest folder was a floor plan, the apartment building, with 3B circled in red, and notes in my grandfather's handwriting. Soundproofing reinforced. Access through alley confirmed. Cleanup protocol revised. I confronted my dad that night. He didn't deny it. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, and told me everything. The apartment was originally used during the mill days, back when strikes got ugly, when certain men needed to be dealt with quietly, so the rest of the block stayed safe. My grandfather didn't invent it. He inherited it. 3B was never meant to be lived in. It was meant to be used. When a tenant became dangerous, violent, abusive, threatening neighbors, my family intervened. Not immediately. They gave warnings, chances, time. But when things crossed a line, they brought them to 3B. No witnesses, no noise complaints, no bodies found. The city didn't ask questions because the problems stopped. I asked my dad how many times. He didn't know. He said he stopped counting after my grandfather died. I asked him why he kept doing it. He looked at me and said, because the alternative is worse. That night, I went to the apartment building alone. The hallway smelled like old paint and dust. The 3rd floor felt colder than the rest. 3B's door was heavier than it should have been. Inside, The apartment was empty, except for a chair bolted to the floor, and drain marks I couldn't explain away. No blood, no horror movie mess. Just a space designed for something you never want to imagine too clearly. I left and didn't sleep that night. The next week, a man named Elliot moved into 2A. He was loud, aggressive. Everyone complained. One night, he threatened a neighbor in the hallway. My dad watched from the kitchen window as police talked to him, then left. Later, my dad grabbed his keys. I stopped him. We argued for hours. He told me if I interfered, people would get hurt. I told him if he didn't stop, I'd go to the police. He laughed. "They already know," he said. I don't know what would have happened if my dad hadn't had a heart attack 2 weeks later. He survived, but barely. I made the call after that. I sold the buildings, all of them. The new owners renovated everything, tore down walls, opened spaces. They never mentioned 3B. Sometimes I wonder if they found it. Sometimes I wonder if they understood. I still walk past that block when I visit Braddock. The lights in that window are off now, but every once in a while, I catch someone pausing there, staring a little too long, like they can feel what used to happen behind that door. And I realize something my dad never said out loud. We didn't own half the block. The block owned us.